The act of waiting is a universal human experience, yet its subjective impact on our perception of time is profoundly bizarre. It's not merely that time feels slower, there's a specific, almost physical sensation that the clock hands have frozen, despite external evidence to the contrary. This phenomenon, often colloquially described as time dragging, has deep roots in our cognitive architecture and how our brains process duration. Consider the oddball effect in neuroscience, where novel or unexpected stimuli are perceived as lasting longer than familiar ones. When we are waiting, especially in a state of anticipation or boredom, our brain enters a heightened state of vigilance, constantly scanning for the event we are waiting for. This increased attentional focus amplifies the processing of each moment, essentially stretching its perceived duration. It's akin to how a single frame in a slow-motion video appears to occupy more time than it would in real time. Our internal frame rate for experiencing reality seems to increase, with each frame being meticulously scrutinized for the desired outcome, making the interval between those outcomes feel extended. This is not simply a matter of having nothing to do, but a fundamental alteration in how our temporal lobes and frontal cortex interact, diverting resources that would normally be used for active engagement to passive observation and prediction. The brain is effectively on high alert, creating an illusion of extended time because it is meticulously monitoring every passing micromoment. The neural networks involved in time perception, particularly in areas like the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the cerebellum, and the basal ganglia, become synchronized to a different rhythm when waiting, effectively slowing down the internal clock and creating a disjunction between objective and subjective time. It's a glitch in our internal operating system, not just a psychological state. The more our attention is directed towards the passage of time itself, the more pronounced this effect becomes. If you consciously try to observe the second hand of a clock, it often appears to stick for a moment after your gaze lands on it, a phenomenon known as chronostasis. This is a micro-level example of how focused attention can distort temporal perception, and waiting is essentially an extended macro-level chronostasis. Our perception of time isn't a direct measurement, but a complex construction, vulnerable to a myriad of cognitive biases and attentional shifts. When we wait, our brain isn't just counting seconds, it's actively constructing a narrative of duration based on expectation and vigilance, which inevitably leads to the subjective experience of time slowing down. This is why a minute waiting for something important feels vastly different from a minute spent absorbed in a task.
One of the most profound, yet often overlooked reasons for time's perceived deceleration during waiting is the stark absence of information flow. Our brains are fundamentally information processing machines, constantly seeking and interpreting new data to construct our reality. When we are engaged in an activity, whether it's reading a book, solving a puzzle, or simply having a conversation, there's a continuous stream of novel information being processed. This constant input creates a sense of forward momentum, a rich tapestry of experiences that our brain uses to mark the passage of time. Each new piece of information acts like a mental tick on an internal clock, creating a dense sequence of events that, paradoxically, makes time feel like it's moving faster. In contrast, waiting is often characterized by a profound lack of novel information. There's little to engage our senses or our cognitive faculties. This vacuum of input leaves the brain with very little to process or to build a narrative of experience from. Instead of a rapid succession of unique ticks, our internal clock experiences long, empty intervals, each feeling disproportionately long due to the scarcity of distinguishing events. Think of it like data compression. When there's a lot of unique information, the file size of a given time period feels large, and it takes time to uncompress and experience. When there's very little information, the file size is tiny, yet our brain still tries to stretch out the playback to fill the perceived void. The brain abhors a vacuum, especially a temporal one. This phenomenon is closely related to the concept of flow state, where deep immersion in an activity causes time to seemingly disappear. Flow states are rich in information and engagement, providing a constant feedback loop that distracts from explicit temporal monitoring. Waiting is the antithesis of a flow state. It's a state of minimal engagement and maximal temporal monitoring. The brain, in its attempt to make sense of the duration, actively seeks out any available cues. In the absence of external stimuli, it turns inward, focusing on internal sensations, anxieties, or even the subtle physiological changes of the body. This inward focus, devoid of external anchors, can amplify the sense of prolonged duration. Essentially, the brain needs events to measure time effectively. Without a sufficient number of meaningful events to string together, the duration between sparse events is stretched, similar to how fewer markers on a ruler make the spaces between them appear larger. The sparsity of information creates an illusion of expanded time, simply because there's less content to fill the perceived interval, forcing the brain to overanalyze the emptiness.
Our perception of time isn't just a live, real-time experience, it's heavily influenced by how we encode and retrieve memories. When we reflect on a period of waiting, especially a long one, the subjective experience of its duration can be dramatically distorted. This is where memory plays a crucial and often deceptive role. Research on retrospective time perception suggests that an uneventful period, like waiting, often feels longer in hindsight than an eventful one, even if both were objectively the same duration. This is because our memory system prioritizes novel, distinct events. A period filled with many unique experiences creates a rich, dense memory trace, which, when recalled, makes the period seem to have flown by. Each event acts as a landmark, and if there are many landmarks, the journey between them feels shorter because there's so much to remember. Conversely, a period of waiting, being largely devoid of unique or memorable events, leaves a sparse memory trace. When we look back, there are few landmarks to stitch together. This scarcity of memorable events makes the overall duration feel stretched, as if we had to cover a vast, empty expanse to get from one point to another. The brain struggles to reconstruct a rich narrative from limited data, and this struggle is interpreted as prolonged duration. Consider the holiday paradox. A vacation often feels like it flies by while you're experiencing it due to all the new experiences, but when you look back, it feels like it lasted a long time because of the abundance of unique memories. Waiting is the inverse. It feels long in the moment due to lack of information, and often feels long in retrospect for the same reason, a lack of distinct, recallable events. Our brain doesn't store time itself, it stores events and their order. The more events we remember within a given period, the more stuff we perceive as having happened, and thus the longer that period subjectively appears in our memory, even if the real-time experience was different. This effect is further compounded by the emotional valence of waiting. If the waiting is accompanied by anxiety, impatience, or boredom, these negative emotions become part of the sparse memory trace. The brain, when recalling this period, doesn't just recall the lack of events, but also the unpleasantness associated with that lack, which further amplifies the retrospective perception of extended duration. In essence, our memory acts like a biased historian, selectively recording the highlights. When there are no highlights, the historian records the emptiness itself, and in doing so, inadvertently stretches the perceived length of the uneventful period. The duration is not objectively longer, but its subjective recall is, making the waiting even more tedious in retrospect.
Our brains are fundamentally predictive machines, constantly generating hypotheses about what will happen next and when. This predictive capacity is crucial for navigating the world efficiently, but it also profoundly influences our experience of time, especially during periods of waiting. When we are waiting, our brain actively sets up an internal timer, an expectation of when the desired event or outcome will occur. This internal timer is not a precise stopwatch, but a probabilistic estimate based on past experiences, context, and any available cues.
If the event fails to materialize at the predicted moment or within the predicted window, our brain registers a prediction error. These prediction errors are highly salient to our cognitive system. Each time an expectation is unmet, it's a small jolt, a signal that our internal model of reality is out of sync. This repeated mismatch between expectation and reality forces the brain to continuously reevaluate, readjust, and restart its internal timer. This constant recalibration, the repeated experience of "not yet," effectively stretches the perceived duration. Think of it like a faulty progress bar on a computer. If the bar moves steadily, the task feels like it's progressing at a reasonable pace. But if the bar repeatedly freezes, jumps back, or makes no discernible progress, the wait for completion feels excruciatingly long, even if the actual elapsed time is the same. Our internal progress bar for waiting is constantly freezing. Dopamine, a neurotransmitter associated with reward and motivation, plays a critical role here. It's not just about the reward itself, but also the anticipation of it. When a reward is delayed or uncertain, the dopamine system, which is crucial for temporal prediction, becomes dysregulated. The brain struggles to accurately predict the timing of the reward, leading to an amplified perception of the intervening delay. The act of waiting often involves a state of heightened anxiety or stress, particularly if the outcome is important. This emotional state further biases our temporal perception. Stress hormones can directly interfere with the neural circuits involved in timekeeping, effectively slowing down our internal clock and making each moment feel heavier and more protracted. The more important or desired the awaited event, the stronger the predictive expectation and the more profound the disappointment, and thus the perceived delay, when that expectation is not met. It's a feedback loop. Failed predictions amplify the feeling of slowness, which in turn intensifies the vigilance and further highlights the unmet expectation. The brain is caught in a self-reinforcing cycle of anticipation and disappointment, which collectively distorts the very fabric of perceived time. Given the peculiar ways our brains warp time during waiting, it's no surprise that one of the most effective strategies to make time speed up is distraction. This isn't just a psychological trick, it's a cognitive bypass that reroutes our attentional resources away from the explicit monitoring of time. When we engage in an activity that demands our full attention, whether it's scrolling through social media, reading a captivating book, or playing a video game, our cognitive resources are almost entirely absorbed by the task at hand. This leaves very little, if any, processing power available for the explicit monitoring of external clocks or internal temporal cues. The brain is simply too busy to feel the passage of time. This effect is particularly pronounced with activities that involve flow state elements, where the challenge matches our skill level and provides immediate feedback. In such states, our sense of self, our awareness of our surroundings, and, crucially, our perception of time all seem to vanish. Time doesn't just pass quickly, it effectively ceases to exist as a conscious experience. The key mechanism here is the reduction of temporal salience. When we are distracted, the passage of time becomes less important or noticeable. Our brain no longer treats each moment as a data point to be analyzed for the arrival of the awaited event. Instead, it processes the rich, continuous stream of information from the distracting activity, creating a dense experiential narrative that, when recalled, makes the period seem brief. However, not all distractions are equally effective. Passive activities, like watching a repetitive show, might provide some distraction but still leave mental bandwidth for time monitoring, making them less potent. Active, engaging tasks are far more successful because they demand higher cognitive load, effectively maxing out the brain's processing capacity and leaving no room for temporal awareness. Consider the difference between staring at a wall while waiting and engrossing yourself in a complex puzzle. Staring at the wall leaves ample cognitive space for the mind to wander, to feel the seconds crawl. The puzzle, conversely, monopolizes attention, creating a dense stream of internal events related to problem solving, which effectively compresses the perceived duration of the wait. Distraction isn't about truly altering the objective passage of time, but rather about manipulating our subjective experience of it. It's a clever hack of our cognitive system, redirecting the very attentional mechanisms that make waiting feel so slow towards activities that, by their very nature, make time seem to vanish. It proves that time, in our minds, is less a steady river and more a perception shaped by the currents of our attention and engagement.